Fans have been demanding more from Bam Adebayo, but is it too late to expect him to change? Can Miami afford to keep Adebayo on their roster, or is it time to consider a trade for their franchise cornerstone? We debate that and more in today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members who cover this team every day. For daily content on the Heat, click that subscribe button on YouTube. Make sure you're following us on your podcast app. Have a great show for you today. We're talking all things Bam Adebayo. What is his trade value if the Heat did the unthinkable and actually started listening to offers for Bam? Should fans expect more from Bam? And at the end of the day, we'll talk about what a team looks like that can contend for a championship with Bam in the middle of it. But I guess that's the best place to start with this conversation, David. We had this conversation in regards to Tyler Hero a couple days ago. Is Tyler Hero a franchise player? And we kind of got into a debate. I don't know how much sense it made. Ultimately, we started talking more semantics than anything else about whether or not he was a face of the franchise, a franchise player, a cornerstone type of player. We disagreed on that. Many of our listeners disagreed with us on that too. I don't know that we ever came to a consensus. I think with Bam, though, we should be able to come to closer to consensus than with Tyler Hero, who is just still one of the most polarizing players in the league, it seems. But with Bam, do you view him as a franchise player?
I disagree. I think Bam is even more polarizing than Hero in some regards, because we know the value with which he's viewed within the front office and the franchise itself. And that's the problem, is that because he's viewed so highly internally, externally, the view is so completely different than that it's hard to parse through it and say who's right. And my own opinion is that he is a franchise player, but only on the surface. And I hate saying that, but the truth is he is not the superstar that I tend to associate with the terminology of franchise player. He is not that 1A. He is not that franchise player that you can build around completely and know that you're always going to be able to contend for the playoffs and a title. That's just not who Bam is. But there's so much more to it in terms of his impact off the court, the way he symbolizes the team work ethic and the mentality and the approach, and the fact that he is the team captain and has been for the last two seasons, when arguably you've had a better player in Jimmy Butler on the roster and Tyler Hero, and yet Bam is still viewed as the most highly appreciated player, that we think he is the captain. I know they gave that honor to Udonis Haslem not that long ago either, but he'd already earned it. Obviously, he'd been there for 20 seasons. At the same time, I think Bam is just viewed in that next mold. He is an all-star level player who they view as representative of the franchise in a way that Tyler, nor Jimmy, nor anybody else since Dwayne Wade has been. And I think that's what makes him a franchise-ish type player. Not exactly the superstar that you build around, but still such an important part of what this team is trying to do.
Franchise-ish player. Let's add that now to the lexicon here. We've got 100 different phrases and definitions and things. And at the risk of creating even more of a semantics argument here, when I think of the debate franchise player, face of the franchise-ish player, to me, that represents more of the investment the franchise is making in the person and the player. You know what I mean? Where it's adjacent to, but not the same as the superstar debate. Is this player a superstar or merely a star or merely an all-star? When we get to superstar, star, all-star, when we get to that part of the debate, now we're talking about just talent on the court, superstar player. Superstars are Joker, Giannis, Luka, Shea. Those are the superstars, the stars among the stars. You have them on your roster, you've got a chance. When I hear face of the franchise or franchise player, I'm not even thinking about this player gives you a chance or doesn't give you a chance. I'm just thinking about the franchise itself, the business that the Miami Heat are, what they're investing into this player. So again, I know I'm introducing a whole lot more semantics and rules and guardrails here, but to me, there's no question about it. Bam is the face of the franchise, and that became evident maybe even before Jimmy Butler got traded when the team named him the captain, which didn't rub Jimmy Butler in a great way when it happened. But they told you exactly what they think about Bam when they made him when they A, extended him last summer, and then B, named him the team captain. This is our new face of the franchise. And you see it in commercials. Bam is the representative of the Miami Heat. He represents Miami, the Miami Heat on Team USA during the Olympics. In terms of a representative of an organization, Bam Adebayo and the Miami Heat are synonymous right now.
Yeah.
And so to me, there's no question he's the face of the franchise. Now, we could debate whether or not he's a superstar, a star, an all-star, a complimentary star. We had this conversation about Tyler Hero, and we had a listener write in. I think the word I was talking about, is he a cornerstone? Is he a franchise player? And we had a listener write in, the word we're looking for is complimentary star. I think that qualifies for both Bam and Tyler Hero. I think they are complementary stars next to a superstar player. Unfortunately for Miami, that superstar player isn't on the roster right now.
Yeah. And it's okay to admit that. And I still think that Miami, maybe this is a conversation for a different part of the show, but I also think in terms of, if you have Tyler and Bam as your top two 1A, 1B, however you want to view them, you can still build a playoff team. It's just about increasing the level. You have to have a higher floor among your other role players. And I don't think that's the case. I think Miami has been trying to do what they can with probably lesser quote unquote talent, or just role players that haven't specialized in any one thing. And that's something we talked about before. The lack of specialization on this roster makes it kind of just generally mediocre. Yeah. It's, you don't have high level defenders, or they're undersized if they are, a la Haywood Highsmith. You don't have elite shooters, or they can be somewhat one-dimensional and limited, a la Duncan Robinson, etc. So they've taken these kind of specializations at which they excel at, and unfortunately they're just also limited. And maybe you could say that Haywood would thrive if there were other high-level defenders. Duncan would thrive if somebody was drawing more attention defensively, because we've seen how much gravity he can command, etc. So there's arguments and nuances to even that discussion, but you're right. It's clear, and I think Miami is still looking at it in terms of what they want to do this offseason. They want to go and get that 1A player, and then kind of reduce Tyler and Bam to more of those complementary star level 2A, 2B.
And for the purposes of this, for the purposes of this conversation, is Bam a player worth investing in the way that Miami has invested in him as the face of the franchise? And to me, and I can only speak for myself, obviously, and I know the opinions vary on this, to your point, it's polarizing. There's people locally that have been saying that they need to trade Bam forever. Ooh. People with platforms, right? But to me, there's no question. When knowing how NBA teams operate in terms of a leadership thing, I remember when I first kind of got into this business, thinking, I always leaning at the analytics, always looking at the numbers, just kind of looking at this in the most cold, calculated way possible. And if you look at it that way with Bam, you could talk yourself into saying not worth investing in the way that Miami has invested in him. But knowing how teams operate, the closer I get to this stuff, the more I actually start kind of trimming some of the analytics and that kind of stuff out of what I pay attention to, because some of it just doesn't matter. And some of the stuff that people don't see matters a lot. And for the record, Bam puts up good numbers. He's a 19, 20 point per game scorer, a perennial defensive player of the year candidate, leads the league in box outs and rebounding rate every single year. And if you want to just look at his rebounding numbers, that's not going to help you. His rebounding rate, in other words, when he's on the floor, his teams rebound at an elite level because he's so good at boxing out and communicating and all those things. And that stuff ultimately matters. The team success over the individual numbers matters more. And the rebounding numbers aren't bad with him by any stretch either. The passing is as elite as it gets outside of Jokic, essentially, at the center position with Bam. Mm-hmm. He does a lot of things in an elite level. And in terms of scoring the basketball, he is merely pretty good at it. I think that's a player worth investing in. And if he's also the culture setter and the leadership in the locker room and the guy that's holding other players accountable and all the things that we hear of Bam, then 100% he's worth investing in as the face of the franchise. Now, at the same time, if he is your number one player, you're not going to go where you want to go. And that's okay. We know who Bam Adebayo is. He's everything except for the number one scorer. That just means you need a number one scorer next to him. That's all. If he was Chris Bosh next to LeBron James or Draymond Green next to Steph Curry, nobody would be talking about, is Bam worth investing in? You would instead be talking about what? Bam Adebayo is the heart and soul of the Miami Heat. Just like you talk about Draymond Green. Just like you talked about Chris Bosh and his importance to everything that they did schematically. That's how you would talk about Bam. And I think that's probably the more accurate conversation for him. Unfortunately, we can't have it because we're so distracted by the fact that the Heat can't score the basketball.
No, it's an interesting comparison, though, because I don't know if I quite agree with you there, because we'd already seen Chris put up all-star level numbers and was carrying the team. They just weren't a very good team. Again, they had roster construction issues.
Toronto, you're talking about.
Yes, when he was with the Raptors. Before he joined his team, he was already a multi-time all-star.
Isn't that what Bam did? He's a multi-time all-star. He's put up all-star. He's literally put up all-star numbers by definition.
Yes, I would say the impact was different. Although, again, it's really hard because you know what? Maybe I'm just hardwired to think when Chris was a better scorer, he was not a better defender. He was not a better defender. Ultimately, he became one of the most versatile defenders in the league, and a big part of what Miami was able to do in order to win 2 championships.
Not what he was doing in
finals
Toronto.
4 straight times. But yeah, that's not exactly what he was doing in Toronto. The Draymond comparison, maybe that's one we save for later on in the show. I think that's an interesting one because if you take Steph and Clay away from there, maybe not even Clay. If you take Steph away from the Golden State Warriors, and that Warriors team is basically just Draymond and Klay Thompson and whatever other supporting cast they had over the last few seasons, not including Kevin Durant either, of course, would we still view Draymond the same way? Like, he's a Hall of Famer. And I think that's pretty clear. A lot of people might not like him and might want to install or not appreciate what he is, but he's a Hall of Famer. And he's been one of the most impactful defenders over the last 20 seasons of NBA basketball. And that being the case, like, he's viewed differently, but they've also achieved that championship level of success that Bam has not. And so he's viewed very differently. I think Bam is a better player in total than Draymond, but he's also asked to do more than Draymond is offensively. And at the same time, you could probably argue that Draymond is a little bit better of a defender than Bam is.
Better two-way player.
The way they're viewed. Yeah. And the way they're viewed is very differently.
That brings us to the trade value part of this. If the Heat were to do the unthinkable and actually listen to trade offers for Bam, what could they get for him? We'll talk about that next. Plus, we'll talk about how you actually build a team that can contend around Bam next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by WayFair. The days are getting longer, the weather's warming up, and people are spending more time outside, which means it's the perfect time to refresh your outdoor space. Whether you're working with a big backyard or a small balcony, WayFair has everything you need to make it feel more like you. WayFair's massive selection of outdoor essentials makes it easy to transform any space into your ideal summer setup. From comfy conversation seats to sleek dining room tables and outdoor decor, they've got it all, and at prices that fit your budget. You want to grab a new patio dining set, maybe set up some string lights? Well, Wayfair's got you covered. They can help extend your outdoor space. They have so many different styles they offer. You'll love the different mix of these styles, and Wayfair makes it super easy to find pieces that match your vibe without spending a fortune. That's great. And the delivery is free and hassle-free, even for the big stuff. So if you want to shop a huge selection of outdoor furniture online this summer, get outside with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Let's talk about Bam's trade value. Here's where I am with Bam. And if some Heat fans don't appreciate him, that's fine. 29 other teams would love to have him.
Yeah.
I can't think of a team that wouldn't want to have Bam on their roster. Now, obviously, financial constraints, can they actually do it? would you want to have Bam Adebayo on your roster? 29 other GMs said, yeah. They would say, yes, we would love to have Bam on our roster. Now, I've talked to other people who cover teams or fans of teams across the league. I remember having this conversation with, maybe it was last summer, with somebody who's a Bulls fan. And I said, what would you hypothetically be willing to offer for Bam as a Bulls fan? And he said, all of it. Everything.
Everything.
Just and Chicago, granted, doesn't have a whole lot that's very interesting. We were talking about a team with Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic at that point. But even now, I think the answer would be the same. All of it. Here's the first round picks, all of it. With Bam, no, you're not getting the guy who can lead you to a championship in terms of the scoring part of it. What you are getting is a Swiss Army knife defender who is the anchor of a top 10 defense every year. And we tend to think that this Miami Heat team is always elite defensively. They are not, but they are always in the top 10-ish. And that's only because of Bam. You were talking about the limited defenders that this team is always working with. Outside, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo were the only elite defenders on this team for years. Haywood Highsmith is good, not elite. Okay, watch OG Anunoby defending for the Knicks. That's an elite wing defender, right? Davion Mitchell is new, but
right.
Bam is the reason why this team is outperforming the personnel every single year. He is an incredible defender, world class. There is not 3 defenders in the league I would take over Bam. There's just not. If you just said, hey, build a defense out of from scratch,
yeah,
Bam Adebayo might be my first draft pick, just because it doesn't matter what the personnel is you have around him. He could switch,
yes.
He could drop, he could play man, he could play zone, he can he could do the weak side help defender stuff. He could be the man in the middle of your defense at center. He does all of it. The defensive rebounding rate, which I already talked about, always elite with him. All of this stuff matters. He might not get the block shots, but as everybody who pays attention knows, the block shots are not necessarily the kind of an overrated stat there.
Yeah.
That's really my point here, is when we're talking about Bam's value, and if we're talking about his trade value specifically, when you're trading for Bam, you're trading for the best defensive anchor in the league out of anybody probably outside of Victor Wembanyama, and maybe you could throw Rudy Gobert at me, but Bam is right there.
Maybe. But if you're looking at even with Gobert, like Bam is the better offensive player by a wide margin, and that being the case.
Great point.
I think you still and his versatility defensively, like Gobert, great defender, but there are moments there where, maybe schematically he might not be the best ideal fit. There's no defense out there that can't use a Bam Adebayo and that he won't make 100 times better because of his versatility. And it's interesting when we talked about Mitchell when he was on the show, and he had such a high opinion of Bam before even joining the team. And once he joined the team, he was like, yeah, I see. I knew all along what a good defender he was. And now I get to see it all the time. Like, he is best defender in the league. And he said that from a guy who has a very high opinion of himself, and so for his level of defense, he acknowledges 100% that Bam is the best defender in the league. And I think that's the way a lot of people around the league view him. So, it's easy to kind of get caught up. And I know that already. I can hear the internet yelling back at us for saying, yeah, but he sucks. He doesn't do this. He doesn't do that. But what he does do, like, focus on what he does do. Defense matters. And I understand you could say the cost of his contract, which, as we found out before we went on the show, isn't quite as bad, not until the extension kicks in. You're getting an incredible value for a player like Bam Adebayo, who contributes so heavily in one particular side of basketball, which is the defensive end. And he also contributes quite a great deal offensively as well, in terms of his screen setting, screen assists, his playmaking, all the things that he does, and all the rebounding and everything else that you talked about. He is so immensely valuable that he is one of the top 30 players in the league. And that's saying something. That's impressive that you can have that kind of player here, and that yet so many people undervalue what it is that he does. I can't be critical of those people, because I understand you still want him to be more aggressive. You still want him to have a more consistent impact on offense. But there are so many other little things that he does and contributes for that I can't. I could see an argument for being critical of Bam Adebayo. I just don't agree with it. And so if you have a problem with that,
can we get back to the contract part of it?
Yes,
because that's the thing. It's okay, great. He plays great defense, but if you're going to pay him if you're going to pay him like a max player, he needs to be better offensively. I think there's something to that. I don't buy into it with Bam, because I think he is tremendously impactful on both sides of the ball, and he's making $37 million next year. The $15 million extension the $50 million a year extension doesn't kick in until after next season. So when you're talking about $37 million next year, that's a bargain. And I know that the numbers sound crazy because we grew up with like $37 million was the max of the max contracts. Like Dwayne Wade never made $37 million in a season for Miami. Right. But I mean, that's not like Derek White makes $30 million. Okay. $31 million. That's sort of the going rate for those kinds of players now. The max player now is $50+ million. Now Bam is going to make that, but that extension doesn't kick in for another couple of years. You think about what Bam's making next year at 37. Zach LaVine's making 47.
Right.
That's a better value. Bam is. Sabonis, 43. Michael Porter Jr., Brandon Ingram, these guys are making $38 million a year. Bam at $37 million a year in terms of the trade value would be tremendously valuable. And I'll go so far as to even say at $50 million a year, that to me is worthwhile for Bam Adebayo, even if he doesn't score like a max player. I think in today's NBA, you can have two max players. The age of the big three is kind of over, and in the new CBA, you can have 2 max players now, and then you build out the depth and all these other things. If Bam is one of your max players, and the other max player is worth the max contract also, right? You can win a championship. I'm convinced. If Bam's essentially your second best player, the defensive anchor, and a guy who can be a complementary star on offense, and you have that number one scorer, legit number one scorer, top 15 scorer in the league, top 20 scorer, whatever it takes to win a championship, and that's your other max player, that's the foundation for a championship winning team, in my opinion.
Did you see enough of the three-point shooting to believe that it's going to be a part of his game moving forward? Because if that's the case, that shifts the conversation a little bit. Like, I mean, there is the potential for him to be a higher scorer than he's ever been because he's going to be making the three-point shot a more consistent part of his repertoire, especially if he has to play alongside a guy like Kelly Ware, assuming that he doesn't, that he isn't traded, or that that Ware isn't traded, or that they don't acquire another player that might shift the way that the current roster is constructed. But I think Bam is going to be a three-point shooting big, a floor spacing big to a certain extent, and still be able to mix in the mid-range and everything else that he does so effectively. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the ceiling is for that. I mean, his 36 numbers kind of are pretty consistent with what they've been throughout his career, maybe a little bit lower. But at the same time, with the three-point shot being a more steady part of his offense, I wonder if we start to see a little bit of a rise and less minutes per game. I think he might wind up being closer to a 21, 22 point per game scorer. And again, given everything that he does defensively, that's a pretty high value player for $38 million next year, $37 million next year. So,
or even $50 million a year after that, right? Yeah, it's still worth the money. To me, the 3-point shooting has less to do with the production, although it certainly helps. It has more to do with the players he fits with.
Sure.
It just makes him an easier fit next to a lot more different kind of players. And I think that's really the value in the 3-point shot. And specifically what he could do with another center on the floor, like Kelly Ware or whoever is on the floor with him at any given point. Yeah, the numbers they slipped last year. He started the year in a shooting slump. I'll take the bigger sample over the smaller sample every time. Yeah. Bam is not as bad as he was to start last year offensively. And there's a million reasons as to why that was the case. The 5-out offense, deprioritizing the mid-range shot, which is Bam's bread and butter, and all these things. But as the season went on, he figured it out. I think Bam will be fine offensively. He'll be right back to being a 20-point per game scorer, adding some of the more three-pointers. Maybe that creeps up to 21, 22. And yeah, I just think, the Heat, they need to find that A1 superstar type scorer, which leads us to our next big question. How do you build a championship roster with Bam Adebayo? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat. All right, let's say you're building the Miami Heat roster from scratch. You have just Bam Adebayo. That's the one guy you have with the contract that he's on. $37 million next year. Max contract extension starts the year after that. You've invested in him as the face of your as one of your franchise players. Done. You got 14 other spots to fill. What kind of players do you think you have to have around Bam to field a championship contending roster? What are you looking for?
High-level wing players. I think that's more something that, because with Bam you have so much versatility defensively, but you don't have him be just the only versatile defender, and so those kind of switchable wings that can pick up a big every once in a while, or could pick up a guard, etc., and also space the floor. That I think is a priority for me, is to find those guys. A better Andrew Wiggins, if that makes a lot of sense. Like, you want somebody like that that can stretch the floor, defend at a higher level, and make things easier for Bam Adebayo, and also space the floor, and can make plays every once in a while to feed him when he gets in a low post or something along those lines. So I don't know if that's quite the total answer.
Well, let's start there.
Yeah,
let's start. I think that's a good place to start, because you hit on something that I think is maybe would have been a better question to start with. What kind of game do you want? What kind of style do you want to play as a team? What's your identity with Bam? And I think switching defensively, that would be our identity with Bam.
for sure.
He could switch all 5 positions at that center spot. That's rare, extremely valuable. But in order to switch everything, we got to make sure everybody else could switch too, which has been Miami's problem the last couple of years, where they've had to have Bam play drop because a lot of their defenders can't switch. And so Bam was not playing an optimal scheme. And I think going forward, the Heat have to be thinking, okay, well, how do we get Bam back into a switching scheme? And if Khalil Ware's there, we could drop the 1-5 pick and roll, switch everything else, whatever. You get into nuances of it. How much zone do we want to play? All this other stuff. But ultimately, push comes to shove, crunch time, last 5 minutes in a close game, we're switching everything, and Bam's at center. That's probably the style I would prefer with Bam, even if we start games with another center. And I would, like, in terms of the roster build, I would want Bam starting at power forward, even if he's closing games at center, just because it's better wear and tear, etc.
Yep.
Length and shooting is what I wrote down, very similar to what you're talking about. It's what are the 2 things that Bam's not great at? Well, he's undersized at the center position, so you want to make sure you're oversized at the other positions, and he's not a respected outside shooter. And in today's NBA, you need to have shooting. So, I mean, I guess you could literally say shooting if you're building around any player in the league. You need shooting, just because that's what today's NBA needs. You just need shooting.
Well,
so
I mean, not around Steph, right? Like, if the question was about Steph Curry, like, I guess.
And then you're like, when I was covering the Warriors, everybody would always talk about how they need more shooters around Steph. And I was always like, are you kidding? He is the shooter. What are you talking about? But they're like, no, he's always double and triple teamed every time he comes across midcourt. We need more shooters. So every player just is better with shooting next to him. Just, that's sort of the thing. So yeah, that goes hand in hand. I think the other part of this too then would be a playmaking point guard. Because the other thing Bam isn't great, he doesn't have an elite handle. And when we talk about why Bam can't get to the basket more and all these things, I think it stems from he doesn't have a great handle. He needs somebody to feed him. And Bam gets to the basket on lob attempts, on backdoor cuts, on pick and roll dives to the basket. You need an elite pick and roll ball handler, entry pass thrower, something the Heat don't have right now, and I think they need to go find.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how likely it is. I mean, I guess, honestly, based on who's available in the offseason, maybe that's a conversation for another time. I would probably look at the draft too, but that's a big hole to fill for such a young player. But and there's no guarantee that even any player that's selected with the 20th pick is going to find their way on this roster, if even Miami winds up keeping the pick either. It just doesn't seem like. It seems almost like as rosters are more balanced, because you have such a more wide distribution of these kind of skills across every position. Again, that lack of specialization. How many of the floor general type point guards are even left in the league? There's a few, but not many. Not as many as there used to be. You probably find a lot more of those guys that could eke by at like 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot. And it's like, well, they still run the game. They can still manage the floor very effectively. The Kyle Lowrys of yesteryear no longer exist.
Yeah, I don't even think that's what they need. You want somebody who's a high level scorer, but you just want somebody to be able to, with the ability to make that pass. That's all. You don't need that classic John Stockton, Chris Paul looking to get Bam involved thing. I do think at the end of the day, you want somebody to also score 30 points per game and dish out those 6, 7, or 8 assists, but it's the quality of those assists that matter more. And how, if 50% of them are going to Bam. Let me ask you this question while we're thinking, because you mentioned long switchable wings on the perimeter. I'm talking about this type of point guard. What if you dropped Bam onto the Atlanta Hawks roster? Just swap out like Onyeka Okongwu. You got Bam in the middle with a healthy Jalen Johnson, Zachary Rizachet going into his second year. I kind of liked how he came along. Obviously, Dyson Daniels, who won Defensive Player of the Year. And then you got Trae Young at the point guard spot.
Be a monster.
How far does that team go in the East? That's an Eastern Conference Finals team at like potentially easily, right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean that defense would be cemented at several positions and more than makes up for whatever deficiencies Trae has. But I mean, his offense makes up for those defensive inefficiencies, and so you might struggle with scoring. But other than that, like Bam would be a great number 2 in that scenario to Trae, but he also, again, magnified by all the other great defenders around him. Nobody would want to face that team because you're going to get your pocket picked 100 times. It's going to be really, really tough to score on that group, given that kind of versatility and length defensively.
Should the Heat? I think there's an obvious question I guess we could explore on another podcast. That'll do it for us today, though. That's a good place to end. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On NBA Game Night. Every game, every night until an NBA champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NBA Game Night on Locked On NBA on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.